We tolerate a lot of shit that we don't want to. And I think that's why so many people are pissed and hate their fucking manager.
In many cases, middle management is the biggest reason people stay or leave a company.
I don't think people speak up fast enough.
But the reality is you haven't found a way to communicate that effectively.
We leave middle managers out to dry, and then we act fucking shocked when they drop the ball.
I'm sure it will work. Hello, my friend. Nice to see you on this lovely day for podcasting and creative endeavors, if you will.
Something that has been top of mind for me recently is I think people intuitively have an understanding of what's fair. Mm-hmm. We don't need to read an ethics book to know the difference between like what is right, what is wrong.
Sure.
I also think that when you observe people, we're able to see the difference of this is a one-time off or like an outlier situation with somebody versus this is chronic or this is a pattern. And when it shows up with managers in the workplace and you see dysfunctional management and leadership and culture, I don't think it often, when somebody can truly express it that way, probably boils down to it happened one time. Mm-hmm. There's probably a series of behavior or things that indicate that this is a challenging work environment or like interacting with this person is problematic. So I think starting there, a lot of managers in the workplace probably come across more as a dictatorship than being in collaboration with people on their team.
I'd agree. I think the big thing for most people is management starts to feel like a dictatorship and not a meritocracy. So it's not a matter of, we were talking about this earlier today, it's not a matter of like we're on the same playing field and the best idea wins. It's more a matter of you report to me and this is the hierarchy and that's how this is going to work based on my terms. And it's not to say that there's no value in hierarchy, because I think to some degree you need it in every system. It's just when that is the foundation of every decision making, eventually what happens to most people is they're like, well, I'm in a communist environment. I cannot do anything other than oblige to what you say. And that does not make me feel like a valued person inside of this system. And so I think for a lot of people, I don't know, would you want to be working for a dictator?
No, I think it's also, I think this is such a much bigger conversation when you look at something. So people don't want to work under a dictatorship. You don't want to feel like, oh, I just have to report to you. I have no autonomy whatsoever. Yeah. Check in, check out, do my tasks, and I contribute no value or ideas to something. Like, I totally understand that. I think that's one camp of it. I think another camp is people don't address stuff as quickly as they need to, and then their frustrations show up in their management style with people as ineffective because you avoid confrontation, you don't have conversations as quickly as you need to, you're not clear on what you want from somebody, and then it gets perpetuated. So I think when you look at a lot of managers, which just kind of leads into other points, but it's like most managers have a dictatorship about them. They probably lack confidence, or on the other extreme, they're frustrated about something.
So is it frustrated, or is it a inability to, or a lack of skill? Because I think one of the things that happens too is when we've talked about this in some of our conversations, I don't always think I think a lot of times the things that we're most frustrated with are the things we're at least good at from a skill standpoint.
Yes and no. I don't know if I fully agree with that. I agree that when you probably feel inadequate or inferior at something, that it's easier to get agitated or frustrated by it. Sure. I also think that at times, like, we get frustrated with other people where what is simple to us or is straightforward to us is not easy to somebody else, and that also creates frustration. So skill issue, yes, in communicating something to somebody, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your skill issue is that you can't do the technical thing that you want somebody to do. But I agree that there's a skill issue, but I don't think it always falls into just I don't always think it's just insecurity from the sense of I can't do this job.
I don't,
Maybe.
yeah, I don't think of it through the lens of I can't do this job, but what I find a lot of the times is the thing they're frustrated with is the thing they're struggling to communicate. So I think I think that's the through line is there is a skill gap in being able to communicate cohesively what it is that they are feeling or frustrated with or challenged by. I think that's the bigger issue. Because I don't think I think if you have a technical challenge, it is not as frustrating because it's easy to look at something and say, hey, I'm not good at it. I don't have the technical skills. Either I'm new here, there's a new system, whatever. When it comes where I find a lot of people's frustration comes to is they're like, X, Y, and Z is happening, but the reality is you haven't found a way to communicate that effectively. So that's what when I say skill, that's what I'm looking at is the skill of communication. That's the challenge.
Yeah. If somebody struggles with that and they're in a manager role, how can they improve that?
I think there's two sides to that. I think one is, are we looking at it from the manager's perspective or the person on the team's perspective?
No, the managers.
The manager's perspective. I think for a manager, if you're struggling with that, I think the willingness to ask for help and perspective is one. You can always ask that from people around you. And then two, I think this is where middle management has a huge opportunity. It's to learn to collaborate with the people you work with and get them to understand that you guys are on the same team. And being able to own the fact that you're imperfect. Because I think sometimes what happens is managers are not clear on when they communicate with their team. And I think this is, and again, I'm sure you have your own perspective on this, but I think a lot of times managers don't get their team or the people around them to see that they're all actually on the same team. And nothing that they're saying or doing has anything to do with I am trying to be a dictator or anything. They just might have a different perspective and haven't found a way to get everybody to understand that we're a group of people with different perspectives aiming towards the same goal. So if you haven't taken the time to like communicate that, again, going back to communication, but create a culture that cultivates, hey, we're all on the same team, it makes it very difficult.
I think for managers, they're in a challenging situation. Mm-hmm. You are quite literally in one of the most difficult roles in a company. You report to the people who are above you. Mm-hmm. And so you're communicating with the person that's kind of like, quote unquote, rolling out the orders, right? Yep. And the orders are to move the company and the team towards the vision to get this desired outcome. Cool. So you have like the leadership that sits at the top. I'm communicating this down. Here's the execution orders of how we're going to do rubber meets the road and turn this into reality. That manager then receives all of this and they're like, okay, cool. If that person does not ask questions for clarification, maybe doesn't challenge like, hey, we don't fully have the resources to be able to do this. Can I have support? And they just like, there's no back and forth communication with them in the leadership. I think wires get crossed and they miss information. So I think that's like one layer of challenge. You're getting communicated orders down. Then you have to manage the behavior of people who are below you.
Okay.
Your job is to have a conversation with somebody. Let's just use a small business. Business owner to a manager to everybody else who is on the team. And then maybe there's even another layer of management to the next person beneath. Sure. You're in this challenging spot because you're trying to like roll out this execution order while simultaneously trying to communicate something and manage the behavior of everybody below you. And I would love to sit here and be like, every single culture out there is super amazing and it's strong. Sure. And like that moves behavior in an organization, but like that's not true. A lot of managers are stuck in the middle dealing with stuff above them while like managing the stuff that's below them. And I think they end up not getting enough training. They don't have enough support. They get such a bad rep from so many people. People are just like, I fucking hate my manager. And it's like your manager might not even actually be difficult or like the way that you perceive them to be. So I think that they have an extremely challenging role inside a business.
I think that also lends to the idea that like in many cases, middle management is the biggest reason people stay or leave a company. Like there in like the hierarchy, a lot of times in a company, the communication gap between someone who, for lack of a better term, is like the bottom and is on the other side of management their only filtering system is the manager. And so if the manager is incapable of distilling it in an effective manner downstream, that can make or break a company, like fundamentally. And the other thing I think that's important too, and it's a point that we've probably talked about to some degree off air, it's a lot of times I think from the employee's perspective, one of the things to realize is like they're doing the best they can with what they have. So none of us are perfect. But I think one of the things you learn too is like managers and just people in general on either side of the coin, they have tolerance for you learning and you making mistakes. They do not have any space for disrespect or any environment that would create that we don't own the mistakes we make or a lack of responsibility, for a better term. And I think what happens for a lot of people is when there are challenges with management, the manager is saying one thing, they are saying something else. They are more fixated on trying to be right, and therefore at times may come off disrespectful. They may come off combative, for lack of a better term, not realizing that the feedback that they're getting from management is like, hey, I'm good with mistakes. I'm good. You're not going to come at me with any form of disrespect around what is being responsible and owning what we are trying to do together as a collective effort. I think people struggle with that.
What about it do you find that people struggle with?
I think people in roles that report to management, especially if they're not in like higher management, I think this is more of an issue with middle management, is they see middle management, if you look at it, is the sole operative responsibility of taking upper management's tasks, objectives, results, and distilling it down into day-to-day functions and behaviors. That is what middle management does. What I think happens is they then see it, and this is from the employee standpoint who is reporting to middle management, they effectively see it as you're trying to tell me what to do, but I'm the person on the front lines. And because I'm on the front lines, I know better than you. Or I see this in a way that you just don't have any context on. And therefore, if you're telling me one thing and I think you're wrong because I'm the one in the weeds, I'm going to push back on you and I'm going to tell you you're wrong. And middle management is giving you tasks and giving you perspectives based on higher concepts that are things that are being distilled down. So you're coming from two different perspectives. You're coming from one person is deeply in the weeds and in the everyday and boots on the ground, for lack of a better term. The other person is reporting from a 2 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
So then the challenge becomes is from upstream down, they are trying to cast a vision to create a better future. And from downstream up, they're telling you this isn't true and this isn't true and this doesn't work. And because they're only seeing it downstream up and they also then perceive that the person upstream can't see down, they then become very combative. Or they see it as you don't understand what I'm going through. But I think the thing a lot of boots on the ground employees forget is middle management was once in your job.
Yeah.
They didn't just, in a lot of cases, you didn't get hired from the outside. I've been in your shoes. So it's not that I don't understand what you do. I may not be as involved on a day-to-day to what you do, but I'm not coming from a place of, and this is something I learned when I was working with one of my managers, because they know what it's like to be boots on the ground and now they're the liaison between upper management and boots on the ground, they have a much better perspective and understanding of the total picture than the person who's often highest up.
For sure.
Because the person highest up. But I think what happens is the people on the boots on the ground, they don't see that person actually can see both sides of the coin.
Yeah. I've personally experienced that, like being a manager, where I started in like the role of the people that I was supervising and then was a team lead. So then was in the position of like a manager above me. I was the team lead. There was a filter between me and that person and the team. And then went into a management role and had a team lead that then also helped with the team and very much experienced that with, I totally understand the struggles from a different perspective than other managers. Also, probably it's like, how new have you transitioned out of one role into the next? I also think that comes with its own set of challenges because you're learning the harmony between, yes, you have like the boots on the ground experience. It is fresh in my mind while simultaneously learning like a different perspective of, and like what needs to be done project wise to move something forward. So I get that. I've personally experienced that before.
Yeah. I think the other part then becomes like, and we've talked about this before, where what happens, what is the difference, or how does middle management tend to operate when things are good versus when things are bad? Like, how do they rally around that? What is the team's experience versus often what is the management's experience?
When things are good.
Yeah.
I think I think people historically prove that when things are good, they let go of the things that made them great.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're firing on all cylinders. This is amazing. And you stop doing the daily habits and rituals, the daily checks and balances, cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure things get done. Cool. You have this like runway of momentum that at some point starts to peter out, and then you start realizing results are dipping.
Mm-hmm.
There's problematic behavior that's showing up. Things are starting to become inconsistent. And then people realize that and they go, oh, holy shit, this isn't being done. And then when you try to course correct, you come in so hot and you come in frustrated. Why isn't this happening? This is basic shit. Why aren't you guys doing it? And then you become extremely frustrated. So I think a lot of times when things are really good, people have a tendency to stop paying attention to the little things that made them good, and that eventually shows up. And then when they try to course correct it, it almost feels like whiplash for people on a team. I think the goal, if you're in any leadership position, is like, how do you maintain consistency all the time?
Yeah. I think the other part of it too is like there's within what you just said, there is a cycle of, especially with managers, there's a cycle of blame and then recognition that kind of seems to happen, where I think sometimes what happens is when things are going really, really well, kind of what you said, we're firing all cylinders, we start to let things slide. But when things are going well and we start letting things slide, I think part of what happens is we get full of ourselves and we're like, we're doing good, things are good, like I'm leading the way, I'm leading the charge, right? And I think on the other side of it is when things go bad, because we weren't paying attention to the same fundamentals, we will then look and blame everybody but ourselves. But that starts at management, how that's handled. I think managers have a tendency to, when things are good, overlook what is actually happening and focus more on the fact that things are going good. And then when things are bad, all of the things that they overlooked when things were going good, they fundamentally then point the finger at somebody else.
I think they point the finger at somebody else because there is a level of awareness that they let something slip, and it is easier to blame somebody than it is to be responsible for your own behavior.
100%.
I think there's a lot of people out there that probably project that outward who are aware that they dropped the ball. And it takes a great deal of courage to look at a team and be like, I fell short in this area, and like, this is what I'm going to do to improve it or evolve and move forward.
What do you think happens to people, or not even what do you think, when do you think it becomes apparent to people that they need to course correct in management and how they approach things? Like you're saying, hey, like you will, I will take ownership and responsibility. But at what point does that actually happen with management for the average leader?
Well, first off, I think that could course correct sooner if the people above them and people in leadership positions genuinely value developing their leaders.
Okay.
So I think we leave middle managers out to dry, and then we act fucking shocked when they drop the ball, and we don't support them, and then we perpetuate our own problem in a business. So I think that's number one, like in culture. People genuinely want to do good work. People want to support their teams. I think you want that camaraderie. You want to win. You want to get results. We like coming to work and enjoying the people that we're connecting with, and it's easy. And like, sure, sometimes I got to have a conversation with you that I don't really want to, but I understand that you're human and shit happens. So like, we're going to flush this out and keep moving forward. I think people genuinely want that. And when you bring them into a culture where you give them that leadership training and that conflict resolution and like being able to deal with difficult conversations, you just hit the ground running with people. And then those who don't fit into the category just get weeded out really quick because hey, like you're not applying what we're teaching and like culturally you're not a good fit. So I think we can avoid that. I think that we start to make a shift and realize that when like employee turnover is probably through the roof. Like we've talked about in other episodes, there's multiple crossroad moments that you come to. There's like many moments in a year that it's like, hey, ding, ding, fucking ding, you should be paying attention to this. And we don't until something is like glaringly obvious and we cannot deny the implications of like what is happening.
Why do you think it often, in many cases, I don't want to say every, but in many cases, it takes so long for the culture of a business to realize that, hey, like, we don't pour enough into middle management, upper management doesn't pour enough into middle management, then for sure downstream, middle management isn't pouring enough into team and boots on the ground type people. Like, what do you think is the linchpin to that?
Communication. I don't think people speak up fast enough in any area of their life.
Okay.
We tolerate a lot of shit that we don't want to. You say something to me and like, yes, we can come back to like be curious and ask that
Yeah,
person like where they're coming from. But we experience moments with people and we don't speak up about it and we don't ask questions and we won't say shit if our mouth is full of it because we fear conflict or like whatever reference points I've collected in my life. So we don't say anything. And then it's like being in a relationship with somebody in month 24, you come home from work and there's a note on the island counter and your partner is packed up and they're gone.
Yeah.
And they alluded to some stuff. Hey, can we spend more time together? Hey, like I miss you. But like it's not, hey, I love you and my needs aren't being met in this relationship. And if mine aren't, yours probably aren't either. So can we have a real conversation about this or we're not going to have a relationship in 12 months? People don't want to be that direct. So if we're like that in so many areas of our life, we don't speak up when like we have a interaction with our manager. If we do, we're super fucking vague about it, which leaves no ability to like resolve anything with somebody. Hey, you know, they ask a question, but like they don't bring up the thing that they want to. And that just gets perpetuated across every level of a business. People quit. Nah, it's not worth it. Why would I even have a conversation? Or I did talk to this person. I brought this up to them 6 months ago and nothing changed. And it's like your idea of a conversation and direct communication is like terrible. You did not communicate fully what you needed to. And then you became resentful and bitter and disgusted by your environment. And then you ended up leaving. So I think we do a really poor job of like fully communicating stuff at every single level. And I think it exists in an organization and then people start quitting.
So
and
why
shows
are
up.
we so bad at communicating in all aspects of our life? What is the thing that lies underneath?
We don't want to be misunderstood and rejected.
It's the perception issue.
Yeah. Like I think first filter is that people fear confrontation or what they perceive to be as confrontational. Cool. What are you scared of when it comes to confrontation? Well, I'm scared I'm going to say or do something that is going to result in me being misunderstood. Okay, well, what happens if you're misunderstood? Well, then they won't love me and they won't accept me. Okay, well, what happens then? Well, then I'll be alone.
That goes right into the second point that we have, which is people are attached to their perception and what they think something is or what it means, not what it actually is.
Yeah.
I think that's a tough pill for people to swallow. I think a lot of times what happens too is like, and this happens in relationships a lot, and I've seen this with guys, and I've probably seen this with women as well. It's that person, that role they play, whatever you believe to be true, that perception far outweighs in your mind the actual things that are happening. Like, oh, she's like with guys, like, oh, she's the prettiest girl. Or with the woman, it's like, oh, he's a successful guy of high status. And even in business, it's like, oh, I get to work with the CEO. I get to work with this manager and how great they are. And I think at times it debilitates us. It cripples us into what that means. Like, oh, I work with this person, so it must mean X, Y, and Z. I might be able to do this. I might be able to do that. I'm dating this person. It means X, Y, and Z based on what the outside is looking at.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have a hard time with that. I've seen it in the corporate world where people will legitimately be like, I want to work with this manager. I'm like, man, I don't think there's anything special. Like there's anything good about them. And they're like, oh, well, if you work with them, then it pretty much means you'll be in this person's good graces, or this opportunity will open up for you. And I'm like, but to what end and at what cost? And is that actually worth it to you?
Something that comes up when you're talking, and I agree with that. My angle's a little bit different, and my train of thought is out there. I think we should aspire to be the type of leader and manager that people want to work with us, because the ROI of our impact on like a character level is fucking profound.
Yes.
And I think that should be the metric of success, or like what I'm aspiring to.
So you're going to the point of how people show up and lead, and not just a title.
Yeah.
And I think that's something in management a lot of people struggle with, which is like, this person has this title versus this person shows up, leads, embodies what leadership looks like. I have been in companies where the person below the manager is better than the person who is the vice president, who the manager reports to.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with the title. It has everything to do with how they carry themselves and how they lead and support and guide and champion for people.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people struggle with that. The other thing too is like and it's such a fascinating thing. I'd love your perspective on this. We are so attached to power and our perception of it. Mm-hmm. And I've watched people in companies be like, oh, well, I'm like really good friends with this person who's this manager, and like they've always got my back and they take care of me. And I'm like, it's one thing to be able to look at your manager or whoever you work with or, report to and say, hey, I know they got our back. But through the lens of, oh, they're a person of power and therefore they'll always have my back, I actually think a lot of times that can create very counterproductive outcomes inside of a business, because then it turns into a political circle where it's like, oh, because he's my friend, or oh, because he works for me, I'm just going to like brush this to the side or like tolerate certain things that I shouldn't. And I think we get very caught up in like a power trip a lot of times in management.
Yeah. I think the same people who are susceptible to doing that are also probably the person that dates somebody based on their status and the way that they would be perceived on social media. And I think that is a deeper conversation, and likely your family dynamics are just exposing you in the workplace. Like, I've never personally been somebody who was like, oh, like I'm going to work with this person and like that's going to somehow, I don't know, like make me so significant because of interacting with this person. But I've met people who have that perception.
They derive significance from what they're associated with.
And my outside perspective on that, maybe this isn't that professional, but it's almost like, which parents' love did you want so badly that you're just like hanging off of the feet of everybody around you that like remotely resembles that parent?
Yes. I think there's also a difference, and like you can talk through the lens of branding. I think there's a difference between being able to associate yourself with other people who are great versus what you just said, which is you associate significance.
Yeah.
Right? I think a lot of people, I notice this with a lot of people as they take on their own different creative endeavors. They're like, oh, well, because I do this and I'm like this person, therefore I'm significant. Versus like, hey, I'm mentioned in the same breath as these people, and I find I'm humbled and I appreciate that people see me in that light. But there's no like, hey, I'm significant because of this. And I think that's something that a lot of people get challenged with, is significance is almost like in a funny way, it's almost like an incentive that people chase. If you think about it, it's like whatever you believe significance to mean, that is your incentive.
Significance is like a fleeting mistress.
Elaborate.
You chase it and it just leaves you in the middle of the night.
What's going on in your world?
I'm a storyteller.
Actually, tell us more. I want to hear this.
Yeah, it's like you're chasing significance. Significance is like a goalpost that just keeps moving every time you get it.
Yeah.
I'm going to get this promotion. I'm going to have this title. I'm going to be on this person's team. This is going to be my manager. This is the company that I work for. And it's just fleeting. Every time you get the next thing, it's not good enough. You disregard it as quickly as you get there. And you can never catch it because it's coming from such an empty void. I think there's a difference between like enjoying the process and who you become as a person. It's like, I'm here for the experiences and how this is going to develop me. But I'm willing to bet that there's very few people listening to this right now that have chased significance in their life and caught the thing that was supposed to make them feel significant, where it like truly resolved something for them.
Do you think that's a selfish interest of theirs?
I think it is a really wounded interest. Like, I think we do it when we're like hurt and we feel so fucking inadequate. And that our sense of self-worth is so distorted that it couldn't possibly be because you are just you, as you are, without like a title and all of these accolades. And here's my life resume of everything I've been able to do. Because if I didn't check all these boxes, then what was my life supposed to mean? I think that fucks us up.
Interesting. So would you agree with the statement that people have selfish interests in minds in their career, and depending on how their incentives are structured, this either drives or repels the behavior inside the organization?
Yeah.
Do you think that if you have one person who's wounded, there's the likelihood that there's a lot of people wounded, and then that influences the behavior inside of the organization? I'm curious because, like,
I think that we have a funny way of going through life attracting mirrors to us and things that amplify where we're already operating from. So I think that if you build a structure and an incentive in a company that is highly fixated on just driving results and an outcome without attaching any like human component to it, you will absolutely attract people that are like, fuck yeah, and are driven by that. And they will be magnetized towards that, because somebody who doesn't operate from that wounded place would have a question mark. Because you just operate different. Like if somebody went to hire me tomorrow and my entire incentive structure was based on like just hitting KPIs at the cost of anything, I wouldn't take the job. Because I wouldn't respect myself. Because I would be able to look at that and identify that I would probably have to violate some like pretty extreme core values to hit my bonus, and like the money wouldn't be worth it to me. Maybe in my early 20s, I might have done it and not even had any level of awareness to like question what I would have to do to hit that outcome. I don't think it would have been out of like malice or like malicious intent, but like I wouldn't have had
the reference points.
No, because I wasn't even aware of certain values that I had. So I think those incentive structures probably attract people that like that's just going to like feed and perpetuate, and then it creates chaos in an organization. Like, what is the point of having a sales manager where it's like you have to hit KPIs no matter what, and then you don't give them any level of leadership training? There's no human component to them whatsoever.
Sure.
And they just churn through team members all the time, because it's like, you're not hitting numbers. Not once would I ever stop to question and consider if you need more support or training, or maybe there's something holding you back. You're getting in the way of the outcome I'm trying to drive, so I'm just going to cut you right off the team. Or I'm going to like bully you into like what I perceive as submission to get you to do your job. Coming back to what I said earlier, you bring somebody into a culture and you train them on leadership, and like you have those different conversations, you're going to weed that person out so quick because they're not going to fit into what you're training them on. You'll watch them give feedback to somebody and be like, whoa, like that's not how we do shit here.
Yeah.
But like we miss the mark on that because we get so fixated on numbers and driving outcomes at the cost of people. And I think that's why so many people are pissed and hate their fucking manager and the companies that they work for.
Interesting. Do you think, I'll ask this question because I'm curious, because I can see two sides of it. Do you think it's the people who hate their manager, do they hate them from a place of ego, or are they hating someone for an ego, or is it both?
I think you have two camps of people.
Okay.
I think true like hatred and anger though is probably like, where are you not being responsible?
Yeah.
Like, leave.
Yeah.
If that's truly it. I do think there's people out there though that see behavior in a company and it stands so much against what they value that they're like, this is a fucking values conflict for me. But
Give me an
those
example.
people quickly leave.
Give me an example of something you've seen firsthand.
Cutting wages over like, we don't have enough money and we're going to cut wages and we're going to slash the sales team's commissions in half. And then we're going to spend money on a bunch of shit we don't need and blast it all over social media. That was a values conflict. Like, there was no coming back. Now, did it take me a while to leave that environment? Yes. There was other components in my life financially that probably stopped me from like pulling the trigger on that with like a downstream
Influence.
responsibility of what that would have cascaded at that point in my life. I could see that being the case for somebody who was maybe married with kids at home.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, like this value is crossed. I don't want to be here anymore. And I am responsible for this thing. So I am not going to just like dismantle
Precarious
this, but I'm
situation,
going to like work my way out of this situation. But like, yes, I think there's at times we have values conflicts and there's no coming back.
In that situation, do you speak up?
Yes.
And when you went through that experience, what did you find? And did you speak up?
I did speak up.
Okay. What did you find? What did you learn?
How unaware people are of their behavior and how...
Is it negligence or is it ignorance?
Ignorance.
Okay, cool.
Ignorance, and then you are made aware, and then you have a choice of the type of person you're going to be. And you have two paths. You have been made aware of this thing. How do you handle it? Do you address it? Hey, I fell short. Or like, hey, I could understand how doing this has created this perception. I'm now going to go make phone calls, set up meetings, and like connect with people and deal with it and be responsible, which is absolutely like admirable, cool. You fell short. I am wildly unaware of most things in my life, but the moment I am made aware of it, I work diligently to try to improve that behavior. Or are you made aware of something and you're like, cool, and you actually don't give a fuck?
Interesting. If you had to boil it down into two sentences about what was the core theme around how that whole situation unfolded, what would you say? What was the core theme of the entire experience for you?
For me as an individual,
That you learn and you're like, this is probably a theme that other people will experience.
that feels a bit like contorted for me. So for me personally, it was, I've made so many mistakes in my life from being unaware of things and have probably unintentionally hurt people or frustrated them from lack of awareness. So it was like, number one, an extreme level of like, you're unaware of the perception of this or like the downstream impact. Cool. I will give you like the benefit of the doubt and the grace for this. I'm now going to ask you to be who you tell me you are. And I can't speak on behalf of this for everybody, but for myself as a woman, communicating with somebody who is probably a male in a leadership role, holy shit, do I hold you to a higher standard.
I had no idea. I had no idea.
The bar is so fucking high. Now, you want to be in an entry level role? Probably got a little bit more, a little more grace for you when it comes to certain things. But if you're going to tell me that you're going to be a leader, that you're going to be like in that position where people look up to you and you are responsible for like the collective of somebody. Real high standard of expectation. Maybe it's not even expectation, it's just standard.
Did you find in that experience for you that in light of, okay, we can call it ignorance and lack of awareness and whatnot, but you're talking about having a high standard, and then you're also talking about taking someone or whoever for who they are or what they tell you to be. How much of that is actually ego on their end?
I think a lot of it. I think you can see how quickly we all have ego and stuff bumps up into it. I think, are you willing to be vulnerable and like surrender it to evolve as a person and embody your values? Because if you're willing to do that, then like I said at the start, like people intuitively know what's ethical.
Yes,
and we
100%.
know what's right. I need to read that out of a policy manual to tell you that. And we have patience for people who make mistakes out of like ignorance and missteps when there's changed behavior that comes with it, and a true demonstration of, I really dropped the ball on this and I didn't even know. This is what I'm going to do moving forward. And then your actions speak so loud that I can't hear what you're saying. I think, how do you know if somebody didn't let go of the ego? Their actions don't change. Because you would have to soften and you would have to be vulnerable, and that would require you to be okay with maybe the perception of being weak, whatever it is, like whatever internal dialogue you have. And I don't think a lot of people want to do that.
So to me, it sounds like the idea of when there is ego involved, you can't connect with others. Like you said, soften, take ownership. And then my other thought there is there's a high likelihood that if those two things didn't exist, they're incapable of listening to feedback from their own team.
Truly listening and understanding.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we listen.
We hear, but we don't listen. I think most people hear, but they don't listen.
Sounds coming out of your mouth, but I'm not going to do anything with it or take it into true consideration. Like I think about this as an example because like the whole kind of theme is like poor management kills workplace culture. And even if you take it a layer of not just like middle managers or whatever it is, let's say I'm just having a day.
Sure.
Like a bomb went off and there's so much on my plate. I'm managing so many things. And you just have a moment where you misstep. Someone comes into your office, someone picks up the phone, or like somebody calls you, you answer it, and they ask you like the dumbest question, or like one more thing happens and you have a moment where you're just kind of like, what the fuck? Cool. That person's probably startled as shit that happened. And they're a bit uncertain and a bit rocked by the situation. And you're just like overstimulated, and it happens, and like we've all been there. Can you be like, oh, whoa, that was a lot. There was a lot going on. That response wasn't conducive to who I want to be as a leader. And do you have the courage to go to that person and be like, hey, in this moment, this thing happened. I responded this way. That was inappropriate, and it's not congruent with like who I want to be, and it's not acceptable for how I should treat you. That will never happen again. I apologize, and like this is what I'm going to do moving forward. Even though that person is rattled, they would have like grace for your humility. And the relationship would probably strengthen after that, because they'd be like, wow, the fact that you were willing, and then your behavior demonstrated it, and like you truly committed to that change. I think like that's how you also build culture, because the ask that somebody's going to be perfect all the time, forever, never misstep, never fuck up is so unreasonable. But how do you respond, and like how do you rectify things when you do? Now that exact same scenario happens, the person blows up, what the fuck, they say something, and it's never talked about again. Like that is the stuff that kills culture.
Yeah.
You were unkind. And it's almost like that person is like waiting for the like, when are we going to rectify this moment? Because like, whoa, my nervous system's like,
not here. We're not here for it. I'm not ready.
And it never comes. And I think when it never comes and somebody is in that leadership and management position, that is the silent stuff that like people don't speak up about.
Yeah.
And then it erodes culture. They don't respect their manager. And depending on the type of person and their personality, they could become like resistant, combative. I stop giving a shit. I stop doing what I need to. Or they just are like such a people pleaser that they don't want any confrontation, that they don't say anything. And all of a sudden, 6 months later, you're filling a position. And on the exit survey, is there anything you'd like to say? No. Just looking for other options.
You're very much alluding to the idea that leadership management doesn't really matter who. There's a fundamental lack of compassion and empathy for people. There's this, like you said, it's like you erupt and you don't even have it within you to be like, this is where I fell short. I'm compassionate to the idea that I'm not perfect and I can empathize with how you feel. We are more likely to just be like, well, fuck it. Like, it seems like managers or even leaders at times, no, this is how it is. Like, woe is me. Like, I'm perfect. Like, if I get mad, that's what it is.
I'm curious your thoughts about this. I'll share mine, but I'm curious like what your perception is of it. It takes a great deal of courage to see where you fell short and then go rectify it with somebody.
Yeah,
and like the courage
100%.
I think is one, look at it. Like admit that you did it. I think that's very uncomfortable for us. It's, I have this huge tax bill coming and people would rather just not open the mail. Like, look at it.
Yeah.
And then you can do something about it. But we don't want to. So it takes a level of courage to even admit and look at the behavior. And then the next level is like the vulnerability to go to somebody after you've done something. And I think at times we want people's acceptance or validation. It's like, you got to do that one for you and not for how that person responds to you. Because that
100%.
person could be like, fuck you.
Yep.
Their own little like mixed bag of whatever they got going on. So I'm curious what your thoughts and kind of like extrapolation of that is when people kind of bark at others and then have to go rectify it.
I think this is, and I developed this more after I left the corporate world. I think I started developing it more when I was like 25. I think your brain's not fully developed till you're 25, so I can't really say it was inherently there when I first got into working and career stuff. I think what happens for us is at some point you have to learn how to purely be yourself, and by owning that, willingly and openly tell people like where you're going to fall short. And there's a level of respect that comes with that people very much lean into with you, and there's a level of compassion and grace that just comes by nature because you were willing to own that, and you're also willing to be soft with people. One of the things that I've learned is the people that I've often found to be great communicators and great leaders, they will often be the first people to tell you all of the places they fall short before you can even tell them. And I think the ability to communicate where you fall short, knowing that you're going to, and understanding that you will, and owning it and saying, this is where I can use support, this is what I need, this is what I'm working on, it brings back, I think, to people that like we are just simply human. And I think there's an element of just simply being human that a lot of times in leadership dynamics and work dynamics in general, it's just missed. The number of people I've met not willing to just be like, hey, I suck at this. Hey, I'm aware sometimes I can get a little charged up, I can get a little passionate, I'm whatever, like all of the things, and the funny thing is, and I've noticed this too, the sooner you own who you are, the easier it is to take feedback. And I find that's very difficult for people like, whoa, what if I'm imperfect? I'm like, well, what if you are imperfect? What is wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. I look at the things that I often hear people be like, oh, you're so calm, you're so this, you're that. I'm like, I'm not this because I've always been this. I am this because I understand where I fall short and I understand how to work with myself. to be what I am, but I'm not perfect. I've just come to an acceptance personally, and I continue to, where it's like, I'm not perfect about anything. I can take feedback from people, and I don't take it as a personalized attack. I think that's the other thing we do, is we take feedback as a personalized attack in these environments. I think that's the other reason why people don't like being vulnerable, because they're like, if I say it to you, what I notice that I'm experiencing with you, you're going to reverse it on me, and then I can't hear that because I came here to give you feedback. And my question to people is, if you're willing to give people feedback, why are you then hesitant to take it back in return?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having a healthy conversation, you'd rather just avoid the entire discussion about whatever it is you're feeling in those dynamics. So I think part of this is also like, can you own who you are?
I have two things. One, people are terrible at having a conversation about their behavior and not making it about the other person.
Yes.
So if I blow up, I come to you, or like something happens, right? Like we have miscommunication, whatever it is. And I say, hey, this thing happened between us the other day. I would like to talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, are you open to having this conversation with me? And you go, yes, absolutely. We start this conversation. For so many people, it quickly turns into, okay, but here's all the ways that you fell short. And people, I think, also have a deep fear that that's going to happen.
Yep.
It's like when you're in a romantic relationship and you like bring something up to your partner and all of a sudden they just start airing shit out that happened months ago. And you're like, that's not even what we're talking about right now. And I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you. But in this moment, we're dealing with this one. And most people don't do that. I think that like we avoid those conversations.
Very much.
Especially if we have a history in our personal life where that routinely happens. It's like, oh, fuck. This is just going to be the next part of it. Second thing, how come you think people put so much more pressure on themselves when they have a title or they're in a leadership or management role when it comes to being vulnerable? Because you said owning who I am, where my shortcomings are. I have heard people say, I can't show that I'm weak as a leader, or whatever their perception is. It's like, I'm in this position of power and authority, and therefore I cannot be this because of that.
I have a different outlook on this now than I probably did even like 5 years ago when I first left the corporate world. I think people mistaken what vulnerability is when that conversation comes up with someone who's supposed to be like a manager or a leader. And when you say, hey, be vulnerable when you are in a position of leadership or power, that doesn't mean having a complete meltdown in front of your entire team. And it doesn't mean that can't happen. I don't think that there are situations I've seen that even in our businesses where that's been a good thing. What I find for most people is they create a connotation of what leadership is supposed to look like. And I often I think of it through the lens of like military. A lot of my friends who were in the military, they're like, oh, you have to be stoic and you have to be strong and all this stuff. And I was like, you can't get to the place where you are calm in a storm until you learn how to experience what's in the darkness. And sometimes that's on your own time. And that's okay. And that's the part that I think people get challenged with, is like, we run to, I'm this title, therefore I should look this way because the great leaders, for example, are stoic or they're unemotional or whatever. And what you find is that's not actually true. They are able to harness their emotion, both in light and dark, towards moving forward and problem solving. But they've come to understand themselves on both sides of the lens. And I think when you're focused more on the title of, I'm the CEO, I'm the manager, I'm this, and you're focused less on the becoming, like you were talking about, and how you evolve as a person, it's very easy to get muddied into the idea of perception. Because if you look at it from a perception standpoint, I don't disagree with the idea that, yeah, a leader should be stoic to a degree. A leader should have the emotional capacity. If we don't focus on helping those leaders and those people learn how to develop the skill set for those things, by the time they get into that role, they will make decisions through panic They will make very irrational decisions. And I've seen this even at high level executives. It's like, oh, this person's good at this. Then they get fired. And it's like, yeah, they made erratic decisions because they're hyper emotional. They don't understand how to harness their emotions to help them, whether it's in the light or in the dark, to solve a problem or to find a way to work through something in a vulnerable environment. And I think that's where people get stuck, is they get more stuck in the perception of, you're the CEO, you're the manager, you're the VP, whatever that leadership position might be and what they think it's supposed to look like, versus like just owning that, like, hey, you can own who you are, work on who you are, and be transparent with who you are and evolve. I don't think, if I look at people who are the great entrepreneurs of our time, I don't think they're all perfect emotionally. I don't think any of them would tell you that. The only reason they're able to carry themselves in a way that is aspirational to most people is because they've gone through the fire and owned their own mistakes, and they'd also be the first people to tell you. And I think that's what great leadership is you're probably going to make a mistake at some point. You're probably going to make a lot of mistakes. I remember a conversation that we had where I was like, it's good for you to express in front of the team. You probably remember the first time we had this conversation. And I remember bringing it up in front of the team, and we had a conversation after. And one of the reasons I had pushed that was not because I think you need to go fucking cry and die in front of your team and make it seem like you're incapable of leading. They just need to see that you're also human. That was really what I was getting at. I have watched you as a person grow as a leader because of it, even though there was a lot of back and forth on that. And if someone's listening right now and you look at someone like Nat or whoever in your life and you're like, what helps someone become a leader, like the CEO, it's being able to work through that stuff when it's not comfortable, especially in an environment where you might feel like it's not on solid ground. It's not the way I want it to be. So many things could go wrong by adding another layer of complexity. But I've often learned that when you add the human element, even in the most difficult times, that's actually what brings people together.
I agree.
And I think that's something that a lot of people lose sight of, is like, if you have someone who's a leader around you, check in and see that they're human. You will find out very quickly if you're working with a true leader or not. Because if they are incapable of that aspect of things, that ship's going to sink sooner than you think.
Mm.
And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Tried and true.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with what you're saying. The thought that's coming to mind is, even when you think of how people purchase, like we buy stories and we buy into people. Like, why do you love some of your favorite brands? Well, you love them because of the story and the mission behind the brand. Like, you're bought in to it. Oftentimes we work for companies and leaders that we're bought into and how they lead. I got a DM the other day from somebody who used to love the company that they worked for. They were all in. They were like, I used to be proud to say where I worked. And now I say I just work for this type of company, right? Because their founder passed away. You're bought into like the leader and the culture and how that person showed up, but we can't buy into people who lack humanness and don't show who they are to the world.
Yeah. I think the going to that person, because we identified where they are at.
Which
what
company
they're at. The one thing that I've learned to appreciate about the corporate world, there's always this like nomer of too big to fail, and like there's certain things about corporate that are inherently have to be different. And I don't think it's that they have to be different from the lens of lacking humanness. I just think when you start to do the averages and the number of people who are responsible for the decision-making filter for a company changes and becomes so simple at times that it does seem to lack the humanness. So I understand when people say, oh, like, and I've seen it with friends of mine where it's like a corporate company bought their company, and after a few years, like, it just doesn't feel the same as it used to and all that. And I was like, no, it evolved into what it needed to be to continue to grow. But that often comes with certain simplicities and certain things like foundationally having to be different that weren't there in the first place, that change was uncomfortable for you. And I think that's the tricky thing with the corporate world. I think there are some companies that do better at creating culture right off the rip in startup versus by the time they're global conglomerate. But But there are things that I've seen at some big companies where I'm like, they just didn't do the best job on certain fundamentals at the beginning. And that's okay. They still grew and became big. But now that you're trying to put those fundamentals back into place, it does tend to lose people because that's not what they came there for. Those things weren't true at the beginning. And so what we do as humans, and this is the psychological side of stuff, is like, what do people say? And I'm sure that's kind of what he was alluding to in the DM. It's like, it's not the same anymore. We hold on to our perception of what it meant, the past, not realizing that nothing is truly forever, right? It's learning to live through that moment. So I remember you were reading that to me, I was like, I know what company it is. It took me about 3 seconds to give you an answer. And I also understand why you would feel that way. And I also understand why they had to make the decisions the way they do. And I think regardless of what level person you are at a company, if you buy into the mission and truly understand that mission has to evolve as the company grows, you will find yourself being able to work with the changes of operation at times. And this is not to say tolerate lack of ethics in any ways, but when certain things get simplified or certain things don't quote unquote feel the same, it's not because they don't want it to, it's because there's an understanding of certain things need to evolve in order for this to continue to grow and sustain more people. And one of my favorite things I hear from people who are employees are like, oh, like when we were a small startup, like it just felt like a family. Like, I love that. It gets bigger. That isn't a reason for you to change how you treat people and how you love on people and how you care about people and being compassionate and empathetic.
Yeah.
But you're a fool to believe that a company with 400,000 employees is going to be able to create the same level of intimacy as a company that has 20 employees. But if we stand on the same values and we consider that we need to treat people with kindness and love and compassion, it doesn't really lose its essence. If anything, it is your responsibility to contribute to the bigger thing now. You'd be playing small to stay small. So why wouldn't you? That's one of my biggest gripes with people I meet who are online entrepreneurs. They want to stay small to play small. And I'm like, there's no fulfillment in that. And then they're like, oh, I have family, I have this. And I'm like, to what end, though? Do you not have a responsibility to show them to dream big and believe that there's more for them out there and see that they're capable of everything? Show them what reality is. It's not going to come with quote-unquote ease. But why wouldn't you want it to be bigger? But I think the reality is most people haven't settled into who they are, so that the path to building something is not going to happen for them. They would most likely lose themselves along the way and do things that they would not be able to forgive themselves for, and they're aware of that because they haven't figured out who they are.
Yeah. Kind of to wrap this up, I think what we said, it was like earlier in our conversation, being the type of leader and manager that people want to work for and work with because of who you are and how you show up. Not your title, but that you live your values so powerfully and so congruently that just by being around you, it elevates how I show up in my own life. And I think that when we shift out of titles, accolades, this is what I need to do for like my perception and ego, do it because I told you to. And you shift away from all of that. And it's like, who do you want to be and how do you want to show up? I think we have a very profound ROI for people. And I think that also keeps people staying longer. I would much rather work with somebody for the rest of my life that had a powerful like character, like human ROI in my life than just a paycheck. And at some point that's like, the money isn't worth it. I want to grow and evolve as a person. So I think if you're listening to this and you're a manager or you're in a leadership position or you work for a company even where you're like, my management is ass. Like everything you guys talked about in so many ways is true. It's like, how can you show up on that team and just be your character?
Be a representation.
Yeah. And I think when we show up as that and we embody that, our energy is infectious.
100%.
And people just gravitate like moth to a light because they want to be around it. And everything gets so much easier when like that's the energy. that you're living your life and operating from.
That's all she's got.
It's a wrap.
Like, subscribe, insert all of the things every other podcaster has ever told you here.
Share.
Tag us. You're probably going to tag her more than you're going to tag me at this point, but that's fine.
What can you do?